We are in the middle. Oh, yeah. If you need a Bible to follow along with this morning, we're going to be in Joshua chapter 24. So you can go back. There's some Bibles back there and also some pens if you want to take notes. And so we're going to be in Joshua chapter 24. The scriptures are not going to be on the screen because we read quite a few. But Joshua chapter 24. Okay. So this is actually a really exciting chapter, but it's also a difficult chapter, and we'll get to the difficulty in a little bit. But we are in chapter 7 of the story, and this is our, we're basically reading a Bible that's organized like a chapter book. Several things are cut out, some of the more tedious sections, so it's not the entirety of the Bible, but it is the story of the Bible in 31 chapters. And so we are in chapter 7 today, and we are talking about the battle for the Promised Land. And I put a little picture up there. I don't know if you can't see it real well on this screen. But that's actually a picture of the archaeological remains of Jericho, which is one of the cities that is conquered by the Israelites. So you can kind of see, some of the left, what's left of the city, and then you can see some modern buildings and structures in the background there. But it is a place. So we're going to be in chapter 7 today. Next week we'll take a little break. We'll be focusing in on the Easter story. That'll be next week. Make sure you pay attention to the Easter schedule in the bulletin. So next Sunday, that's a week from today, 7 a.m. will be our sunrise service. We were going to try to do it out there, but I'm looking at the weather, and I don't know if the weather's going to let us do it out there. We may have to do it in here. But it'll be 7 a.m. for the sunrise service. We're going to do a special thing called Flowering the Cross. 8 o'clock is breakfast in there. So if you can't make it for the sunrise service, at least come make it for breakfast. And then at 9:30, we're going to have our Easter worship service. So that's different from our normal worship service at 10:45, okay? Just remember, you get here at 10:45, you'll be here in time to go hunt some eggs, okay? That's basically what you'll get here for. So one of the reasons we want to do that, though, is just because, Easter is oftentimes a family day. Right, and so we want you to have time to be able to spend time with your family and not get out from church as late as we normally do. So that's kind of the hope in that, and we'll see if it works out. Okay, so we're in chapter 7. The people of Israel, they are finally about to enter into their land. Remember, God promised Abraham 3 promises. What was one of the promises? I just gave it away. Land. What's another promise? Man, the kids did better than you last week. What did you say? Big family, yes. Many descendants, right? You're going to be a great nation, all right? And then the final one, all nations will be blessed through you and through your people. And so the people of Israel are finally going into their land, and the story of receiving their land is fascinating. And so it begins, first of all, with Joshua taking over from Moses. Remember, Moses in Deuteronomy, he kind of gave his last speeches, his 5 speeches, and he goes up on a mountain and he dies. And it's time for Joshua to take the mantle of leadership. And so Joshua takes over. He sends 2 spies over to the Promised Land rather than 12. He probably learned from the last time, right? So he sends 2 spies over to the Promised Land, and specifically, they go to the city of Jericho, and these 2 spies hang out with a prostitute named Rahab. And if that makes you a little uncomfortable, it's because it is, right? That's not a part of the story that you'd make up if you know what you know about God and what he thinks about, husband and wife being together and only being for each other. And so they go and hang out with a prostitute. They stay there. And while they're there, they find out that the entire city of Jericho is afraid and scared because they had heard all the things that God had done for the Israelites, right? They heard how he had brought them out of Egypt with these powerful plagues. They heard all these amazing things. And so the people of Jericho, they know that the Israelites are camped just outside their city, and they are shaking in their boots. And so the spies return, and they report that everybody is afraid and that it's time to go and to take the land. And so the Israelites, they cross the Jordan River, but then they run into a problem because all the males that had been born out in the wilderness while the Israelites were wandering around in the wilderness had not been circumcised. And so God said, you got to do this. You got to get this done. And so Joshua does it, and all the men are circumcised, and then they go straight to Jericho. They take the city, and the city is supposed to be all devoted to God. Everything is supposed to be burned and destroyed because God says it's mine, okay? But there's one guy, anybody know his name, who doesn't follow instructions. Anybody remember? Doesn't follow instructions. Come on, guys. Are you reading the story? Achan, yes. Achan does not follow instructions. He steals some of the things that were supposed to be devoted to God. And guess what? There's consequences. Okay, so Israel goes out to fight their next battle. It's against the city of Ai. Okay, Ai. I don't know how to say it. I don't know. So they go out and they fight this battle. It's just a small little city, and the Israelites get there, and they get routed. They get completely beat down, and Joshua's like, what's going on, God? Why did this happen? And God says, because you did not follow my instructions. Somebody stole the devoted things. And so Achan is found out. He is stoned, and then the Israelites are finally able to take the city of Ai. Well, then Joshua makes a mistake. Okay, there's a place called Gibeon, and the place of Gibeon is actually close, but the people pretended to have come a long way. So they show up, these Gibeonites show up in Joshua's camp, and they have old clothes, they have sandals that are worn out, they had bread that is all crusted, and they say, we're from a long way off, and we've heard of all the things that you've been doing, and we want to make a treaty with you. Want to make a treaty with you. And Joshua does not consult the Lord, and Joshua makes a treaty with them. And then come to find out, these people from Gibeon are very close. And part of the instructions that God had for the people of Israelites is that you're supposed to destroy everything in the land. You're supposed to drive all these Canaanites out. But because Joshua makes this treaty, he doesn't break it. And so the Gibeonites stay among the Israelites, and they become somewhat slave labor for the Israelites. Well, then you have 5 kings that decide that we're going to gather together, and we're going to become allies, and we're going to try to kick these Israelites out of our land. We don't want them here. So 5 kings from 5 different cities, they come together, and they attack the Israelites. But what we're told is that when the battle lines are formed and the fight begins, God begins to fight for the Israelites. He throws the armies of the 5 kings into confusion, and then they start to run away. And while they're running away, all of a sudden giant hailstones start falling from the sky. And what we're told in the story is that more people die from the hailstones than by the sword of the Israelites. Like, it's just this incredible story. And not only that, Joshua looks up into the sky, and he's like, God, it's going to get dark before we're done beating down these armies. Can you make the sun stand still and the moon stand still so we can finish? And God does it. And what we read in the story is that there was never a day like it again in the history of the world. Well, then another alliance happens. A guy by the name of Jabin of Hazor. He gathers together a bunch more kings, and we don't really get a lot of details about this battle other than when they came and fought against the Israelites, they lost. The Israelites won, and they took they destroyed this final alliance of kings. And so that's basically Joshua 1 through 11, and then Joshua 12 through 22. It seems to be kind of a summary of all the things that was done and all the allotments of land. It's kind of boring if you're reading it, just reading through the Bible. But there's one refrain that keeps popping up throughout the entirety of that boring section. And you didn't read it because it wasn't in our story. It wasn't included in the story, the book that we have. The refrain is something like this. The Israelites did not finish driving out the Canaanites. They didn't finish. So God gave them the land, but the Israelites just didn't finish it. They didn't finish driving out the Canaanites. And so then in chapter 23 and 24, we have kind of the closing, Joshua's farewell to the people, his final speech, if you will, and not nearly as long as Moses' 5 speeches. But we're going to look at those. Get these pens out of the way. We're going to look at some of these words at the end in Joshua's speeches. Turn over to Joshua 24. 14 and 15. And so Joshua basically says, don't turn away. He's calling the people, don't turn away from God. Don't let the Canaanites turn your hearts to their gods. Look at verse 14. He says of chapter 24, so fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt. Serve the Lord alone. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or will it be the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live? But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Why does Joshua have to even say that? Why does he have to say, put away the gods? Who are you going to serve? I think the reason is because there's people that are still serving other gods among them. And if you and I are really honest with ourselves, a lot of times in our own relationship with God, there are things that we have a tendency to put above God and above following Jesus our Master. And so these words need to be said. Who are you putting first? And Joshua says, as for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord. And so the question goes to us, who are you going to serve? Who are you going to serve? Because you can only choose for yourself who you're going to serve. And the people, when Joshua says these things, they agree. Let's read verses 16 to 18. The people replied, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. What? If you know the story, it's like, why would you even think that, Joshua? Why would you even think that? Right? And here's the thing. If you've ever been to church camp, you know exactly what this is like, right? You go to church camp, or you go on a retreat, or you go on a mission trip, and you say, I'm not ever going to serve anybody other than God. I'm going to live my life for him. And then the first week back at school, or the first week back at your work, or your job, or whatever it is, all of a sudden you find yourself serving things other than God. The people replied, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. For the Lord our God is the one who rescued us and our ancestors from slavery in the land of Egypt. He performed mighty miracles before our very eyes. As we traveled through the wilderness among our enemies, he preserved us. It was the Lord who drove out the Amorites and the other nations living here in the land. So we too will serve the Lord, for he alone is our God. Famous last words, right? Famous last words. And so that's the end of the book of Joshua. With Israel in the promised land, but the Canaanites are not completely conquered. Okay, so just out of curiosity, did anybody find these stories difficult to read? Anybody find these stories difficult to read? So I'm just curious, what was your difficulty with these stories? Just anybody willing to say it? You afraid? So I'll tell you what my difficulty is, and this is a difficulty that people have had for a long time. It's difficult for me because of the total annihilation of the Canaanites that is commanded of the Israelites. Like what we read over and over and over again throughout the story is that they're going in and they're killing men, yes, but they're also killing women and children. And I don't know about you, but that is hard for me to read. And it's hard for me to understand. Now, here's the thing. I didn't start questioning this until later in my life. I grew up with these stories. You know, I was born in the church, like almost literally, right? My dad was a preacher, and we actually lived in a house that was used as a church building. Okay, that came later. I think I was 2 years old when we moved there. But I was literally born in the church. Like I went to church from the time that I can't remember to the time that we have now. And these stories, I just kind of accepted them with this kind of like childlike faith. And it wasn't until my late 20s and 30s that these stories really started to bother me. Because genocide and killing of innocent non-combatants is looked down upon in our world. Like, that's not okay. That's violating the rules or the rules of warfare, if there is rules of warfare. And yet that's the very thing that we are told in the book of Joshua that happens. And we see this commanded and carried out from the beginning of the book until the end. And so what do we do with that? What do we do with that? And so I just want to kind of give you 4 approaches that have been used to approach this part of the story. The first approach is actually not the approach that I would recommend, but the first approach is rejecting God altogether. That's the first approach. And there are people in our world who have read these stories in the book of Joshua, and they have said, I can't believe that a loving God would ever do that. He's not worth worshiping. I'm not going to worship him. I'm going to become an atheist, and I'm going to walk away from the church. That's a reality. In fact, one of the greatest atheists and writers of the modern era, a guy by the name of Richard Dawkins, hated God because of these stories. Okay? So, again, that's not what I recommend, all right? That's not what I recommend, but I just want to acknowledge it. The second approach is a rejection of the genocide stories in total. And what I mean by that is that there are Christians who just latch on to God as revealed by Jesus, and they believe that these genocide stories were basically some kind of propaganda to build up and strengthen the nation state of Israel, and just simply aren't true. So there are Christians that believe this. I've read their books. All right, so that again, that's not one that I lean towards. The third one is more of a nuanced reality, and that is that we recognize that these stories are a product of ancient Near East hyperbole. And I know you're like, what is hyperbole? I haven't heard that word since I was in, high school literature or maybe college literature or whatever. Okay, hyperbole is just exaggerated statements and claims that are based on actual events, but not meant to necessarily be taken literally. Okay? So in other words, in Joshua chapter 6, verses 20 and 21, when we're told that the Israelites go in and they kill, young and old and, all the men and everything else, what it is, it's exaggerated language that says they won. Okay? They beat Jericho. They took it down. It doesn't mean that they actually did kill all the young and the old and all those things. It just means that they won. In other words, it's not genocide, as long as you understand that this was just their way of talking about winning. Okay? So that's number 3. Number 4 is we acknowledge God's violence against sinfulness. In other words, we just acknowledge that God has the right to decide if a people group needs to be exterminated. We don't get to choose that. But maybe God is just. Maybe he knows. Maybe he has information that we don't. Maybe he knows what the future holds for that people group, and he gets to decide if a people group can be exterminated or not. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly where I land in this in these 4 approaches, because these are basically the 4 approaches. Some people, they land. I probably tend to go between 3 and 4. That's just kind of where sometimes I'm like, yeah, I believe in the 3-part, or maybe God just can decide. I don't know. But the point is that the whole reason that I share this with you is because I want you to know that this is something to wrestle with in the text. And people are going to respect you more if you have wrestled with it, if you have thought through it, if you have reasons for why you believe what you believe. But if you just don't think about it, if you just don't wrestle with it, if you don't acknowledge that this is a difficult thing in our world, then people are not going to respect you very much. And so my hope is that if this bothers you, if you're like, I don't know what to do with this, my hope is that you'll read. And if you need some recommendations for reading on the different places of where they are, I probably won't give you books on the first view, okay, the first approach. But the other approaches, if you want to read about those, do it. My only encouragement is just to wrestle with it, because it's a difficult part of the story. And I know I spent a whole lot of time on this, but I think it's important to acknowledge that this is difficult, and I don't like it. I just don't like it. I don't like this part of the story. Okay, so let's move past that. Just cleanse your cleanse your brain for a little bit, because now I want to get into the more fun part, which is the application and how do we live out what we see in this book. It's not by killing people, by the way. That's not the way it works, okay? That is not how you live it out. Okay. Can you think of a time in your life when you were confronted and completely overwhelmed by a situation and you didn't know how in the world you were going to get through it? Have you ever faced a situation like that in your life? I mean, what did you do? Did you retreat? Did you give up? Did you fight through it? I mean, think about what the Israelites were facing. Okay, think about what they're facing. They had been slaves. They were not powerful. They did not have an army. And I mean, they had great numbers, but they didn't have training. They didn't have cities. So here they are. They're looking across the Jordan River, and they see all these fortified cities. They see the giants who are descended from Anak, right? They see these monsters of men, and they see these fortified cities. How are they going to be successful in this? How are they going to make it? Maybe you're facing a similar situation. Maybe it's a relationship challenge. Maybe it's a friendship that has gone on the rocks, or maybe it's a marriage that is struggling, or maybe it's a rebellious child that you're struggling with. Maybe it's a work challenge. Somebody at work, your coworker, they're just not, you're not getting along with them. Maybe it's the fact that you hate your job, or maybe it's a financial challenge. Maybe you have bad habits that you're literally paying for now, or maybe you've lost your job. There's all kinds of challenges that we face in life. And the question is, how do we face these challenges and be successful? And I think Joshua actually has this beautiful picture of what it looks like to be successful. So I want to just jump into this. We're going to go back to the beginning of Joshua, and we're going to look at what I believe is a pattern for success when we're facing challenges in our lives. All right, turn over to Joshua chapter 1. Joshua chapter 1, verses 7 and 8. Joshua chapter 1, verses 7 and 8. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night, so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. So what's the first one? I bet you can guess. What's the first part of the pattern for success? Any guesses? I heard something. Any guesses? Come on, guys. People of the Word, yes. Yes, be people of the Word, right? Be people of the Word. Meditate on it, read it, think about it, pray about it, memorize it. Our natural tendencies, if you know anything about yourself, our natural tendency is to be selfish, bitter, hateful, and violent. Like that's our natural tendency. One of the best ways to combat these tendencies is to be in the Word of God regularly. And guess what? We have a lot more Word than they had back then, right? I mean, the finished Bible was not anywhere in their understanding, right? They just had the things that Moses had written down for them, and it probably wasn't even all written down yet, right? A lot of it was being transferred through oral speech, passed on from one family and one generation to another. We have a lot of God's Word. Be people of the Word. All right, we're going to jump into Joshua chapter 9 for the second part of this pattern for success. Joshua chapter 9, and we're going to start reading in verse 14. So the Israelites examined their food, but they did not consult the Lord. This is talking about the situation with the Gibeonites that we talked about just a minute ago. Then Joshua made a peace treaty with them, the Gibeonites, and he guaranteed their safety, and the leaders of the community ratified their agreement with a binding oath. 3 days after making the treaty, they learned that these people actually lived nearby. And so the second part of this pattern is this: seek God's will before making big decisions. All right? Seek God's will before making big decisions. Be people of the word, but also seek God's will. Now, there's ways to do this, right? We can give time to prayer. We can talk to people who are spiritual giants, that spiritually mature, that we, trust in. But, of course, you've also got to be in the Word. The second one comes back from Joshua chapter 1, or the third one, sorry. Turn back over to Joshua 1. And we're going to be in verse 5. Joshua 1, verse 5. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, God says, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. All right, so the third part is take a risk. Take the risk. Now, this is assuming that you've been in the Word. This is assuming that you have been seeking God's will. But once you have God's, it seems God's answer, step out and take the risk. Because guess what? Whenever we step out and do what God is calling us to do, it's going to be risky. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be simple. It's not going to be able to be done by your power. We're going to have to rely on God's power. Take the risk. Step out. Put yourself in a position that success will only come if God is in it. And then finally, before the conquest begins, as we talked about just a minute ago, the people ran into that problem. They had not circumcised all their children. And so in Joshua chapter 5, Joshua has all the men circumcised. So therefore, for a few days, the only people moving around the camp were women, because all the men were laid up. Right? But here's what I want to pull from that. We must be people whose identity comes from God. For the Israelite, circumcision set them apart. But that circumcision was an outward sign of an inward reality. They followed the one true God, and they cared for their fellow people. But here's the thing. For us as followers of Jesus, there is a sign that all of us must have. Does anybody remember what that sign is? John chapter 13, 34 and 35 for a little hint. Love, right? Love. Jesus says, I'm giving you a new command. Love each other as I have loved you, so you should love each other. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. And I think it's important to ask ourselves, what does love require of me? When we look at the situations, the challenges in our lives, when you think about that person in your life who you're facing off against, that you're not getting along with, ask the question, what does love require of me? And I can tell you this, love does not require me to get my own way all the time. It doesn't require, me to just constantly think about my side of the situation. It actually requires me to understand the other side. It requires me to talk to people, to love people. If you're going to love somebody as you love yourself, you're going to understand their point of view as well as you understand yours, right? What does love require of me? So important. All right. I hope that this makes makes things move around a little bit in your brain a little bit as you face the challenges in your life. Think about, how can I be successful? And honestly, the book of Joshua gives us a really amazing pattern that we can follow to be successful. Okay. Now, may our God and Father himself make your love increase and overflow for each other and for everyone else. May he strengthen your hearts so that you'll be blameless and holy in the presence of our God and Father when our Lord Jesus comes again. Let's all stand. I want to invite the worship team to go ahead and come up, and we're going to sing a special song called The Battle Belongs to the Lord. And my hope is that if you're in a battle right now, that this song will be words that you can use this moment. Let's pray, and then we'll sing together. God, we come before you. And Lord, this is a difficult book for me, as I've already shared. But Lord, there's also some really practical things that we can learn about this book and about success in our lives. And God, more than anything, I just want to pray that we would be people of the Word, that we would seek your will before we make big decisions, Lord, that we would take the risk when we have discerned what your will is. And Lord, that we would be people whose identity comes from you. Lord, that we would love each other just as you loved us. We pray all this in your Son's name. Amen.